You ever walk into a room and instantly feel like something is off? Not wrong, off. Like the air is heavier, your energy's been drained, or your mind's foggy for no reason. You brush it off, blame stress, maybe even a bad night's sleep. But deep down, something doesn't sit right. That's not coincidence. That's not paranoia. That's a signal, and you'd better start paying attention, because sometimes the enemy isn't obvious. Sometimes the attack isn't loud. Sometimes a witch is retaliating against you, and you're too busy rationalizing the unexplainable to see it. But if you don't learn the signs, you'll keep suffering in silence. Retaliation doesn't always show up in the form of loud drama. No, the ones who practice dark manipulation, the ones who understand energy, intention, and spiritual warfare, they retaliate quietly, strategically, and without mercy. They won't curse you to your face. They'll smile while you're unraveling behind closed doors. And by the time you realize you're under attack, they're already 6 steps ahead of you. But knowledge is your weapon. Awareness is your shield. So let's talk about the signs. Because once you see them, you can't unsee them. And that's exactly what keeps you safe. Suddenly, people around you start turning cold. Not all at once, but bit by bit. They distance themselves. Friends you trusted stop calling. Allies become silent. You hear whispers, feel judgment, and you can't figure out what you did wrong. This isn't coincidence. It's isolation by design. Witches retaliate by cursing your connections, severing the support system that makes you strong. Why? Because once you're alone, you're easier to manipulate, easier to break. And they know it. They're counting on you to question yourself, to blame yourself. But this isn't your doing. This is engineered spiritual sabotage, and the moment you recognize it, you start reclaiming your power. Your sleep starts collapsing. You toss. You turn. You wake up between 3 and 4 a.m. every single night with a heavy chest or racing thoughts. Your dreams, not just weird, they're chaotic, dark, filled with dread or shadow figures. That's not a restless night. That's spiritual interference. That's a witch pulling strings while you're most vulnerable, when your conscious mind is off guard. Because if they can invade your rest, they can shake your clarity. Fatigue makes you weaker, distracted, less sharp. That's the play. And if you ignore it long enough, it becomes your new normal. But you don't fight energy attacks with logic. You fight it by becoming spiritually disciplined. Nothing seems to work anymore. You put in the effort, the grind. You pray. You plan. You act. But progress feels blocked. Everything starts going backward. Business slows. Projects collapse. Delays pile up. You're not cursed with bad luck. You're under strategic attack. Retaliation comes by disrupting your abundance, by planting energetic landmines in the areas that matter most. These witches don't need a wand. They need access to your name, your essence, your habits. That's how they weave sabotage right into your path. And here's what they're counting on: that you'll blame yourself instead of recognizing spiritual warfare when it hits. You feel watched, eyes on you when no one's around, a coldness that follows you, maybe even shadows in your peripheral vision, but when you turn, nothing. That's not your mind playing games. That's not anxiety. That's energy trailing you. That's monitoring spirits, sent as retaliation to observe, report, and influence. The more you ignore it, the stronger it gets. This isn't Hollywood horror. This is real-life spiritual surveillance. And the only way to push back is to reclaim your spiritual authority. If you don't declare war on the energy following you, it will declare war on your peace. Your emotions aren't yours anymore. One minute you're calm, the next you're irritated, weeping, or hopeless. And there's no clear reason why. These aren't mood swings. They're manipulations. Energy vampires, witches, manipulators, they retaliate by hijacking your emotional state. If they can influence your feelings, they can influence your decisions. Confusion, despair, rage, all become tools used against you. They create chaos inside you so you're too distracted to fight what's happening to you. That's the trap. The retaliation isn't always external. It burrows into your heart, your mind, and turns your emotions into weapons you can't control. And if you're not grounded, you'll keep handing them the ammunition. You begin to question your faith, your protection, your worth. Doubt creeps in, not just about your path, but about your power. That's the most lethal form of retaliation. When they don't just aim to break your life, they aim to break your spirit. Because a person without belief is easy to manipulate. and they know that. They don't want you to believe you're under attack. They want you to believe you're just cursed, just unlucky, just forgotten. But you're not. You're targeted because you're spiritually potent. You're light in a dark world, and light is always hunted. So if this is hitting home, I need you to stop brushing off the signs. I need you to stop second-guessing your instincts. And I need you to understand this: retaliation only works when you don't fight back. This isn't about fear. This is about preparation. Spiritual warfare is real, and if a witch is retaliating against you, it means you've already threatened their control. That's power. Own it. You think losing people always means you did something wrong. No, sometimes losing people is a direct result of spiritual retaliation. You were fine last week. Your relationships were steady. Communication was normal. And then almost overnight, things shifted. Friends go quiet. People stop replying. You walk into rooms and the energy is cold, even hostile, and you can't figure out what changed. You replay conversations. You question your tone. You wonder if you offended someone. But that's the trap, getting you to internalize an attack that was never about your actions, but about your influence. See, witches don't always throw curses at your body. Sometimes, they go after your network. Because if they can isolate you, they can weaken you. If they can turn people against you, or even just remove them from your corner, they can shrink your power base. You become easier to destabilize, easier to doubt, easier to manipulate when you're alone. And make no mistake, this isolation is surgical. It doesn't hit everyone all at once. It creeps in slowly, subtly. A cancelled plan here, a ghosted message there. Before you know it, you're looking around and wondering where your support went. This is not bad luck. This is spiritual warfare dressed up as social distance. It's intentional. It's retaliatory. It's designed to cut off your emotional oxygen so you become spiritually winded. Because your strength isn't just in your will. It's in your tribe. And when that tribe gets fractured, your resistance weakens. But this is where your awareness becomes your armor. If you can spot the pattern, if you can connect the dots and see this for what it is, you take back control. You stop blaming yourself for a war you didn't start, and you start preparing for the counterattack. That's the difference between being a target and being a survivor. You ever notice how the attacks never start when you're wide awake and ready? They start when you're most vulnerable. When your defenses are down, when your mind drifts into sleep, when your body is trying to recover. That's not random, that's deliberate. Witches retaliate in the quietest hours, between 3 and 4 a.m., the spiritual dead zone. And if you're waking up around that time night after night, drenched in anxiety, heart pounding, or with a crushing pressure on your chest, that's not insomnia. That's interference. That's spiritual entry. They know your conscious mind is off duty, so they slip in through the cracks. Through dreams, through energy, through open doors you didn't even realize you left unguarded. Your dreams become chaotic. People you trust show up twisted, situations feel dark, threatening. Sometimes you wake up in a panic. Sometimes you don't even remember dreaming, but you still wake up exhausted like you've been in battle. You have. That's spiritual warfare disguised as restlessness. You feel drained because they're draining you. Your clarity fades because they're fogging it, and you keep telling yourself it's just stress, just overthinking. But how long will you keep giving logical excuses to a spiritual problem? The truth is, retaliation doesn't always need confrontation. It needs access. And if they've studied your patterns, if they know when you're most passive, that's when they'll strike. While you're lying there thinking you're safe, they're throwing shadows across your mind, planting fear, disrupting your nervous system. Because if they can own your night, they'll own your day. Your thoughts get cluttered. Your judgment gets cloudy. You start making poor choices because you're running on spiritual fumes. That's exactly what they want. Subtle destruction. No explosion, just a slow unraveling. And here's the thing, most people will never talk about this. They'll call it nightmares, anxiety, sleep paralysis. But if you're under attack, sugarcoating it won't save you. You have to fight back differently. Not with noise, but with discipline, prayer, protection, intention. They come for your rest because they know how powerful you are when you're fully awake. Don't hand over your peace. Stand guard even when your eyes are closed. Because if you don't protect your night, you'll keep losing your days. Everything you touch starts falling apart. The harder you work, the more things collapse. You put your heart into a project. It stalls. You invest time into your goals. They get blocked. Opportunities vanish. Money dries up. People who promised to show up suddenly disappear. And you start wondering, what am I doing wrong? That's exactly where they want you. Because this kind of retaliation isn't about physical harm. It's about disruption. It's about breaking your momentum, sabotaging your growth, cutting off your abundance at the source. When you feel like you're stuck in quicksand while everyone else is moving forward, that's not bad timing. That's not laziness. That's spiritual warfare dressed as failure, witches retaliate by targeting your flow, your prosperity, your ability to manifest and produce. Because if they can delay your destiny, they can dilute your power. They plant resistance in your path. Not enough to destroy you outright, but just enough to keep you off balance, to frustrate you until you start questioning whether you're even supposed to succeed. That's how they win. Not by overpowering you, but by making you doubt yourself so deeply that you stop showing up for your own life. And if you're not careful, you'll start calling sabotage bad luck and retaliation God's delay, when in reality, you're being strategically targeted. This is how they fight. Through the unseen, the intangible. They don't need to touch your body when they can choke your blessings. And the most dangerous part, you normalize it. You convince yourself that struggle is part of the process. You keep grinding with no results, ignoring that this isn't hustle fatigue, it's spiritual obstruction. They're manipulating the energy around your efforts. They're polluting the atmosphere of your plans. So everything you build, they're already tearing it down behind the scenes. But the moment you wake up to this, when you stop blaming fate and start naming the interference, you begin reclaiming territory. Because once you recognize the difference between hard work and spiritual sabotage, you stop tolerating delay, you stop accepting stagnation, and you start fighting back, not with desperation, but with precision. Because your path was never broken, it was interrupted, and now you know exactly why you walk into your house and feel like something's behind you. You turn, nothing. You're in your car, and suddenly there's a weight in the air, like eyes on your back. You try to brush it off, tell yourself it's just nerves, maybe you're overtired. But it keeps happening. Over and over. The feeling that you're not alone, even when you are. That's not paranoia. That's presence. Because when a witch retaliates, it's not always about direct attack. It's about surveillance. It's about monitoring spirits, sent to trail you, to observe your moves, to feed information back to the source of the retaliation. They don't need to touch you if they can track you, and they will. Day and night, these spirits don't knock loudly. They follow quietly. They sit in corners. They whisper doubt. They cloud rooms you used to feel safe in, and the longer you ignore it, the stronger it gets. Your space begins to shift. You notice the energy change in places you used to find peace. Maybe the air feels thicker. Maybe the silence starts ringing in your ears. Maybe your pets act strange, staring at walls or barking at shadows. That's not your imagination. That's spiritual espionage. They're watching not because you're weak, but because you're dangerous. You threaten their control. You carry light they can't replicate. And light makes them nervous. Here's the truth most won't say out loud. Retaliation doesn't always scream. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it lurks. And if you keep walking through your life ignoring that eerie weight on your shoulders, you're leaving your blind spots wide open. You start second, guessing your decisions. You hesitate. You shrink. And that hesitation, that's exactly what the retaliation is designed to create. It's not just about fear, it's about interference. They want access to your confidence, to your intuition. If they can make you question what's real, they can make you walk away from what's yours. But you don't fight this by acting afraid. You fight it by taking back your territory, by cleansing your space, by standing in your authority. You weren't given discernment just to ignore it. You were given it to survive. And if something in you keeps screaming that you're being watched, it's because you are. It's not about fear. It's about awareness. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and once you confront it, it can't stay. 1 minute you're laughing. The next you're crashing. You wake up feeling fine, then without warning, you're drowning in emotion you can't explain. You snap at someone you love. You cry for no reason. You feel rage building up like a fire in your chest, and you don't even know what triggered it. That's not just a bad day. That's not just mood swings. That's energetic manipulation, and it's a signature move in spiritual retaliation. Because witches, manipulators, energy predators, they know that if they can hijack your emotions, they can control your decisions. And once they control your decisions, they control your direction. Emotional sabotage doesn't come at you with a knife. It comes subtly. It seeps into your atmosphere like smoke. You don't see it. You don't hear it. But suddenly your peace is gone, your joy is flickering, and you're walking through your day like a bomb waiting to go off. That's not natural. That's engineered. They know how to project energy. They know how to curse without words. They attach chaos to your emotional frequency, so you start to feel unstable, unhinged. It makes you impulsive, reactive, vulnerable. And while you're too busy managing the mess inside you, they're out there enjoying the silence of your self-destruction. You've got to understand. This retaliation doesn't need to come in the form of physical illness or major setbacks to be lethal. All it needs is for you to lose control of your inner state. Because once your emotions are off balance, everything else begins to spiral. Your thoughts follow your feelings. Your energy follows your thoughts. And your decisions follow all of it. You start burning bridges you should have crossed. You isolate yourself when you most need connection. You quit things you were born to finish. Not because you're weak, but because you're being played. When a witch retaliates, they often aim for your heart space, because that's where your power lives. That's where your intuition speaks. That's where your empathy, discernment, and courage flow from. If they can corrupt that, if they can poison that, they don't need to touch your body or mess with your bank account. They can just sit back and let you unravel yourself. That's the dark genius of emotional warfare. It's invisible to everyone but you, and it makes you feel crazy. So you stay quiet. You suppress. You smile through it. But deep down, you know something is wrong. This is why you need emotional discipline, the way a soldier needs armor. You can't just walk through life assuming every emotion is yours. You have to question it. Where did this feeling come from? Did I absorb it from someone? Is it mine or was it assigned to me? Because sometimes the sadness you're feeling was sent. Sometimes the anxiety building in your chest was planted. Sometimes the anger you carry didn't start with you. It was projected onto you. And if you don't examine it, if you don't spiritually vet what you're carrying, you'll end up living under a spell you never agreed to. You think they're just angry because you walked away. You think retaliation is just about revenge for what you said. No. Retaliation happens when your light exposes their darkness, when your growth reminds them of their stagnation, when your confidence triggers the insecurity they've spent years hiding. That's when they strike, not always with curses or rituals, but with intention. They don't even need to be in the room. A thought, a word, a wish spoken with malice can shift the atmosphere around you. And if you're unguarded, it lands. You start to notice patterns. Your emotions don't respond to your environment. They control it. You enter a space and your whole mood shifts. You talk to certain people and feel drained, like your joy just got stolen mid-conversation. That's not accidental. That's spiritual transfer. And if you're not doing the inner work, if you're not clearing your energy, grounding yourself, protecting your peace, you'll keep walking through your life as a magnet for every toxic frequency thrown your way. That's not weakness. That's a lack of awareness. And once you're aware, you get to make different choices. So many women think they're broken, that something's wrong with them, because they can't shake this emotional weight. But what if I told you it's not you? It's the retaliation against you. You're feeling what was never meant to be yours, but you're carrying it like it's truth. That shame, it was projected. That fear, it was assigned. That anxiety, it was sent with intent. And until you start seeing your emotional patterns as a battlefield, you'll keep losing wars you don't even know you're in. You've got to reclaim your emotional authority. You've got to learn the difference between reaction and discernment. You don't just react to how you feel, you interrogate it. You don't just collapse into sadness, you confront it. Is this mine? Is this truth? Or is this spiritual interference? That pause, that question, that's power. Because now you're not just a target, you're a shield, You're not just absorbing, you're reflecting. That's the shift retaliation fears the most when you become unshakable from the inside out. Understand this. Emotional warfare is how they gain access without detection. No rituals, no physical touch. Just subtle chaos, layered over time. And if you don't do the work to clean your emotional house, they'll keep sneaking in through the cracks. They'll build strongholds in your mind, disguised as moods. And the next thing you know, your entire life is shaped by feelings that were never even yours to begin with. This is why spiritual hygiene is not optional. Just like you shower to stay clean, you have to cleanse emotionally and energetically. You have to cut cords, close doors, cancel access. You have to build emotional muscles so strong that no outside energy can shift your state without permission. Because when you master your emotions, you become a fortress, and retaliation can't penetrate what it can't provoke. They count on you breaking down. They expect you to lose control. That's their plan, to make you believe that you're the problem. To keep you so wrapped in confusion and inner chaos that you never realize you're under spiritual attack. But now you know better. And when you know, you can't go back. You don't get to pretend anymore. You fight different. You protect your space. You check your emotions. You reclaim your narrative. Because the moment you stop letting your feelings run you, you start running your life again. Retaliation thrives in emotional ignorance. But once you learn the signs, once you recognize the manipulation behind the mood, the setup behind the sorrow, the energy behind the anger, you take your power back. You become the storm they tried to send your way. And nothing scares a witch more than the one who refuses to be emotionally owned. You start questioning everything, not just what's happening around you, but what's happening inside you. Your confidence, gone, your instincts, blurry. The inner voice that used to guide you with clarity suddenly feels muffled, like it's being drowned out by 1,000 doubts. You used to trust your gut. You used to move with conviction. Now, every decision feels like a gamble. Every step feels unstable. That's not insecurity. That's not just being in your head. That's spiritual retaliation, and it's not random. It's a calculated hit to your mind. Witches who retaliate don't always need to come for your body, your job, or your home. They come for your mental clarity. Because once they cloud your perception, they don't need to curse you. You'll start sabotaging yourself. You'll talk yourself out of opportunities. You'll second-guess your worth. You'll hold back from stepping into your next season. That's how they operate. By whispering lies into your spirit so often, so subtly, that you begin to believe them as truth. You're not good enough. You're too late. You're too much. And when those thoughts take root, they grow into self-doubt, confusion, and paralysis. It doesn't come all at once. It's slow, intentional erosion. One day you're sharp and clear. The next you're spiraling, unable to focus, unable to trust your own judgment. That's the goal. To make you question your intuition, to make you doubt your discernment. Because once they fracture your inner compass, you stop navigating. You start drifting, and drifting people are easy to control. You don't notice the manipulation because it hides behind your own voice. That's what makes it so dangerous. It's not loud, it's familiar. It sounds like you, feels like you, so you never think to fight it. That's how deep the retaliation goes. You begin turning to everyone else for answers. You search for signs, for confirmation, for someone to tell you what you already know but no longer believe. That dependency, that need to outsource your inner knowing, that's manufactured. They've robbed you of your spiritual autonomy. Because a confused mind is a controlled mind, and they're not just trying to slow you down, they're trying to reprogram you. So instead of seeing yourself as a threat, you see yourself as a burden. Instead of walking in purpose, you walk in hesitation. And hesitation is the slow death of purpose. Have you noticed how your self-talk changed? How you went from believing in yourself to apologizing for even having dreams? That shift didn't happen by accident. It happened because someone, or something, targeted your mindset with surgical precision. You were doing too well. You were standing too strong. You were becoming too powerful. And power like that always draws retaliation. Not with guns, not with fists, but with confusion. Confusion is spiritual anesthesia. It numbs your awareness while someone else does the cutting. And here's the thing no one around you may even notice. Because from the outside, you're still showing up. You're still functioning. But inside, you're spiraling. You start losing time, forgetting details, struggling to finish what you start. Your motivation flatlines, your excitement vanishes, your vision dims, and worst of all, you start accepting it. You start saying things like, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm just not ready. No, that's not you. That's the retaliation talking. When you're under mental attack, you don't need more information. You need restoration. You need to take your mind back. You need to rebuild the fortress that was torn down while you were distracted. That means silence. That means discipline. That means cutting out noise that feeds the confusion and returning to what centers you. Because clarity is not a luxury. It's survival. And when you're spiritually aware, you stop letting your thoughts run unchecked. You inspect them. You interrogate them. You ask, where did that come from? Does this align with truth, or is this planted doubt? This isn't about overthinking. This is about spiritual defense. You don't win a war with blind optimism. You win by out-strategizing the attack. And the moment you start treating your mind like sacred ground, everything changes. Because the mind is the battlefield, and when retaliation strikes, it doesn't want to kill you. It wants to redirect you. If it can't take you out, it'll turn you around. And if you let it, you'll spend years walking in circles, never realizing you left the path. You have to reclaim your mental authority the same way you'd defend your home. You don't just leave the door open. You don't invite chaos to sit on your couch. You lock in, you get still. You quiet the noise until your real voice returns. The voice that says you are enough, you are capable, you are called. Because that's the voice retaliation fears most. The one that remembers who you are, even after everything tried to make you forget. It starts small. You trip over something you've walked past 100 times. Your phone slips out of your hand and shatters. A light bulb explodes for no reason. You spill hot coffee on your clothes right before a meeting. The car won't start. The Wi-Fi crashes during your most important call. 1 or 2 incidents and you write it off. Just a bad day, right? But then it keeps happening. Again and again. And suddenly you're in a storm of mishaps, inconveniences, near misses, and outright accidents. That's not clumsiness. That's not random. That's spiritual sabotage. And when it starts piling up like that, you're not unlucky, you're under attack. Witches retaliate in ways that disrupt your rhythm, not just emotionally, not just spiritually, but physically. They throw interference into your daily routine, not to hurt you in one big blow, but to disorient you piece by piece. These aren't accidents. These are strategic interruptions. Little moments designed to throw you off center, to frustrate you into exhaustion, to keep your energy so scattered that you forget the bigger picture. Because when you're constantly playing defense, against delays, against breakdowns, against little fires everywhere, you don't have the time or clarity to build, to grow, or to fight back. This is how they work, subtle and consistent. The goal isn't to take you out with one massive curse. It's death by 1,000 cuts. You keep getting hit with little problems, one after another, until you start to believe that chaos is your norm. That maybe you're cursed. That maybe you're just not meant to succeed. And that's the real danger, not the spilled coffee, not the broken mirror, but the mental agreement that forms when you start to believe that something is always going to go wrong. That's when they win. Not when they knock something over, but when they knock your mindset off course. And here's where it gets deeper. Those accidents don't just create frustration. They open portals. They weaken your emotional defenses. A burned dinner turns into a bad mood. That bad mood turns into snapping at someone you love. That argument leaves a wound that grows into bitterness. Now it's not just a bad day, it's a poisoned atmosphere. And it all started with a bump, a break, a glitch. That's the power of spiritual retaliation. It uses the smallest tools to cause the biggest damage. Because while you're busy reacting to the symptoms, the source keeps operating unchecked. Have you ever wondered why these incidents only seem to show up when you're about to do something important? Why the attacks increase when you're on the verge of breakthrough? That's not a coincidence. That's a response. Every step forward you try to take gets met with resistance. That's the retaliation catching up to your momentum. That's the spiritual opposition trying to shake your focus before you make your move. Because if they can distract you in the details, they can delay your destiny. And if you're not careful, You'll get so caught up in the chaos, you'll forget you're in a war. You need to understand something critical here. These attacks escalate when you're getting closer to something that matters. When you step into purpose, retaliation follows. So when everything starts breaking down, that's not a sign to stop. It's confirmation that you're hitting something real. You're disrupting systems that were never meant to be exposed, and those who benefit from your silence, they notice, they retaliate, not always by coming for your name, but by coming for your day, your focus, your peace. So what do? You stop brushing it off. You stop laughing and saying, "I'm just having one of those days." No, you're not. You're being targeted. And the sooner you admit that, the sooner you can fight back. You start praying over your space. You speak authority over your environment. You command protection over your plans. You treat your routine like sacred ground, because it is. And you armor up not just for the big battles, but for the little ones too. The interruptions, the breakdowns, the distractions. Because once you see the pattern, you stop falling for it. You stop allowing minor chaos to steal major power. You take back your rhythm, your energy, your day. And when that happens, retaliation loses one of its greatest weapons, your reaction. The chaos only works if it gets inside you. But when you stay calm in the storm, when you stay focused in the delay, you don't just survive the retaliation. You reverse it. You become the force they feared in the first place. You start slipping away from the very things that used to protect you, the habits that kept you grounded. You don't feel like doing them anymore. The prayers you once said with fire, they feel dry now. Your journal's collecting dust. Your Bible's closed. You stop lighting the candle. You stop declaring protection over your home. You stop engaging in spiritual disciplines that once felt natural, necessary, sacred. That shift, it's not just laziness, it's not burnout. That's retaliation, silent, strategic, and devastatingly effective. Because witches don't always retaliate by cursing your body or blocking your career. They come after your discipline. They come after your consistency. Because they know if they can disconnect you from your source of power, the rest will collapse on its own. Your strength isn't just physical, it's spiritual. It's what you do when no one's watching. It's how you show up when life is quiet. And if they can wear you down just enough, they know you'll stop showing up, not loudly, but slowly. And when you start skipping the very practices that kept your spirit clean, your mind clear, and your space protected, that's when they move in. You don't notice it at first. You tell yourself you're just tired, just overwhelmed, but before long you've gone days, maybe weeks, without prayer, without stillness, without even acknowledging that your energy needs maintenance. That's exactly the opening they're waiting for. They don't need to kick the door down if you're the one leaving it cracked open. Retaliation thrives in disconnection. The moment you stop feeding your spirit, retaliation starts feeding on your spirit. It drains you in the background, while you're too distracted to fight back. That spiritual drift. That's how they gain ground. Because when you're disconnected from your source, your discernment gets dull. Your wisdom gets foggy. You start making decisions based on fear or fatigue, not on clarity. And the worst part, you start forgetting who you are. You lose the voice that reminded you of your strength. You lose the courage that kept you moving. And now you're not just tired, you're vulnerable. You've walked away from your armor, and you don't even remember doing it. Retaliation isn't always about dramatic chaos. Sometimes, it's the slow, steady pull away from your power. And it's meant to feel subtle. That's what makes it so dangerous. Because if they came at you screaming, you'd fight back. But when the attack feels like emotional numbness, when it sounds like, "I'll pray tomorrow. I don't need to protect my space today. I'm just too busy," you don't even realize it's war. You think you're just exhausted. But spiritual warfare uses exhaustion. It feeds on distraction. That's how retaliation hides. In the quiet gaps between your rituals, your boundaries, your declarations. This is where discipline becomes your lifeline. Because discipline isn't about performance. It's about protection. You don't pray because you're religious. You pray because it's armor. You don't cleanse your space because it's trendy. You do it because retaliation doesn't knock, it enters. And if your spiritual gates are unguarded, it doesn't matter how strong you think you are. They will slip in. Through doubt, through fatigue, through disinterest. You don't have to be evil to be effective. You just have to be inconsistent, and they know that. So they work hard to wear down your patterns, your focus, your fire, until you forget why you ever fought in the first place. You've got to wake up to the fact that spiritual discipline isn't optional. It's survival. You can't afford to be passive with your power. Not when retaliation is this real. You've got to recommit, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it. Because that's when the attack is at its loudest. When your spirit starts going quiet. When you stop hearing the warning bells. When you stop caring about the rituals that once saved you. That apathy, that's a symptom of sabotage. So what do you do when you feel spiritually numb? You move anyway. You speak even when it feels empty. You light the candle. You open the word. You cleanse the room. You say the prayer. You return to your practice. Not because it feels magical, but because it's warfare. Your spirit doesn't need convenience. It needs consistency. That's what keeps the retaliation from landing. That's what keeps the door sealed. That's what brings your power back online. You don't wait to feel inspired. You discipline yourself into awakening. Because they can't destroy what they can't disconnect. And when you stay connected to your power, your truth, your higher source, they lose access. Every single time. You ever walk into a room and feel like something's watching you? Even when you're alone. That chill crawling up your spine, that sudden sense of being monitored, judged, scanned, don't ignore it. That's not paranoia. That's not your imagination running wild. That's a sign. That's presence. And not the kind you welcome. When a witch retaliates, sometimes they don't send chaos. They send surveillance, spirites, energy forms that were assigned to observe you, report on you, track you. That sensation, it's them showing up to study your next move. You think spiritual warfare only happens during dramatic moments. No. Some of the most dangerous happen when it's quiet. When you're brushing your teeth, doing the dishes, lying in bed. That's when they hover. That's when they linger. These watchers, these energy leeches, they're not always loud. They hide in the shadows. They sit in corners. They don't kick the door in. They slip in unnoticed. And if you're not tuned in, if you dismiss the Eunice as nothing, they stay. They grow. They observe. Because that's how retaliation works. It watches before it strikes. You start noticing little things. The air feels heavy in one particular spot in your home. You avoid a certain hallway at night. You keep catching something in the corner of your eye. But when you turn, nothing's there. Don't dismiss that. That's how energy reveals itself. That's how retaliation lets you feel the curse before it fully activates. It's testing the ground, probing your defenses, trying to figure out if you'll confront it or ignore it. And every time you act like it's not real, it gains more room to operate. Spiritual surveillance is an actual tactic, just like intelligence gathering in law enforcement or espionage. Before an enemy launches an attack, they do reckon. They collect data. They assess vulnerabilities. That's exactly what these spirits do. They sit with you, watching how you handle pressure, where your mind drifts, which fears dominate your thoughts. They exploit your emotional patterns. That moment you're thinking about quitting. They feed it. That self-doubt you're wrestling with. They echo it louder in your mind. They don't have to possess you. All they have to do is influence you from the shadows. Subtly, steadily, until you start unraveling on your own. And the most terrifying part, they don't just observe. You begin to absorb their energy. You start having nightmares that don't feel like yours. You wake up exhausted, like you've been fighting in your sleep. You feel drained in your own home. Your mood swings out of nowhere. That's the energy transfer. That's retaliation entering phase 2. Because once they've watched enough, once they've identified your weak spots, they begin to whisper. They begin to nudge. And if you're not spiritually aware, you confuse their influence for your own thoughts. But here's the truth. Your spirit always knows. Your body always reacts, even if your mind tries to rationalize it away. You'll get that headache out of nowhere. You'll feel tightness in your chest when you walk into a certain space. You'll feel eyes on you in the dead of night. You have to stop ignoring your instincts. You have to stop silencing your inner alarms. Because retaliation doesn't need to hit you like a hammer. Sometimes it creeps in like a whisper, a presence, an energy that should not be there. So what do? You confront it, you cleanse your space, you declare out loud that every surveillance spirit, every monitoring force, every energy that doesn't come from God, is not allowed to dwell where you live, breathe, and sleep. You stop tolerating the feeling of being watched and start commanding your space back. You walk through every room with authority, not fear. You anoint your doorways, you speak truth into your home, you stop whispering prayers and start declaring war. Retaliation through spiritual surveillance only works when you're passive. But when you call it out, when you name it, when you break the agreement it tried to form in silence, that's when it flees. Because darkness can't dwell where light is loud. Your voice, your authority, your awareness, they are your weapons. You don't shrink under that unseen pressure. You don't pretend it's not real. You stand up, you speak up, and you make it very clear. This is not your playground. This is your battleground. And you don't lose ground where you stand in truth. When you feel like your prayers are hitting a ceiling, like your voice is being drowned out in silence, like heaven has gone quiet on you, that's not coincidence. That's interference. That's a sign. When a witch retaliates, they don't just go after your body or your relationships. They go straight for your access point to power. They go after your connection to God. Because if they can make you feel abandoned, ignored, or disconnected spiritually, they can neutralize your most powerful weapon, your ability to call on divine authority. This is the most dangerous kind of retaliation, because it doesn't look like chaos. It looks like delay, like unanswered prayers, like fatigue in your spirit. You try to worship, and you can't focus. You try to pray, and your words feel flat. You try to stand in faith, but everything feels off. You doubt if God is even listening. That's not just spiritual warfare. That's sabotage. That's a strategic block meant to convince you your source is no longer available. Because if they can get you to stop praying, they don't even need to keep attacking. You've already surrendered the one thing that gave you dominion, your voice in the spirit. What you don't realize is that many of these witches, they're not just operating in darkness, they're studying it. They've learned how to manipulate energy, bend it, twist it, and weaponize it to block spiritual transmission. So when you feel that numbness in your soul, that disconnection from truth, that spiritual exhaustion, it's not just you. That's resistance. That's a sign something unseen is actively working to sever your line to God. But this is where most people get it wrong. They assume that silence from heaven means absence. It doesn't. Silence often means warfare. It means something is standing between your words and your breakthrough. And the mistake is thinking you need to be more emotional, more desperate, more dramatic. No, you need to be more precise, more intentional, more disciplined, because when retaliation shows up as spiritual blockage, it's not about how loud you pray. It's about how consistent you are in pushing through the resistance. You think the witch wants you afraid. No, they want you tired. They want you wary. They want you to stop mid-battle because you feel like God isn't responding. But your faith isn't built on feelings. It's built on fact. And the fact is, your authority doesn't come from emotion. It comes from access. And access is something you protect at all costs. That means when you sense interference, you don't retreat. You press in. You double your prayer, even when it feels empty. You speak scripture, even when it feels like no one's listening. Because your consistency is what drives out retaliation. This isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. Retaliation tries to convince you that the delay is denial. It's not. It's proof that what you carry is a threat. Your prayers are not small. Your words shake atmospheres. And the enemy knows it. That's why retaliation comes for your access. But here's what they don't tell you. Access can't be revoked by a curse. It can only be surrendered. And if you don't surrender it, they can't stop it. You might feel delayed, but you're still connected. You might feel blocked, but your voice still carries weight. So you keep showing up. You keep praying when it's hard. You keep worshiping when it's dry. You keep declaring truth when your heart doesn't feel it. Because that's not weakness. That's warfare. That's how you fight back when retaliation tries to silence your power source. You don't beg for breakthrough. You command it. You don't whimper in the dark. You declare in the fire. Because your voice is not just heard in heaven. It's feared in hell. And if retaliation is hitting your spiritual connection, it's not because you're weak. It's because you're making impact. So stay loud, stay bold, stay rooted, because silence is the signal that your next victory is about to shake something loose. So now you see, retaliation isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with a broomstick or a boiling cauldron. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, calculated. It weaves itself into your fatigue, your confusion, your delays, and your doubts. It targets the places where you hold the most power, your mind, your spirit, your relationships, your destiny, and tries to distort, distract, and disconnect you from the truth of who you are. But here's the part you must never forgetting, which is don't retaliate against people who are insignificant. They don't waste energy on someone who poses no threat. The very presence of retaliation is proof that you're dangerous to the darkness, that you carry a light too powerful to ignore, that your influence, your calling, your voice, it all disrupts their agenda. That's why they come. That's why they watch. That's why they retaliate. But retaliation is not the end. It's a warning, and a weapon if you know how to use it. You don't back down when it shows up. You don't shrink. You rise. You get strategic. You protect your peace. You guard your faith. You walk in spiritual authority like your life depends on it, because it does. And when you do, no retaliation, no curse, no spell, no watching spirit can override what God has already placed in motion for your life. You are not a victim. You are a force. And the moment you stop seeing spiritual attacks as something to fear and start seeing them as confirmation of your power, everything changes. So the next time you feel that resistance, that chaos, that silence, don't panic. Smile. You're being noticed, which means you're doing something right. Keep going, keep fighting, and never, ever hand over your power to what was never meant to have it.